Welcome back to part 3 in the Pomodoro video series. This is probably my favorite time in the series because we get to take everything that we've coded in Python and we've built in Serpens for the block out, and we get to put them together to make something look beautiful for our Pomodoro. And rather than having an ugly label and a little bit of UI that we need to do cleanup, we'll have something that looks really nice and polished for our add-on. I'm going to teach you how to make use of a switch data setup, as well as switching icons for our Pomodoro. We're going to teach you some notification setup, how to make use of notifications in your add-on, and finish everything off by making a nice beautiful UI and setting up some debugging so you can debug your timer. Let's jump right in. Alright, so getting onto our Pomodoro graph, one thing we need to do is we've got our Pomodoro button and our previous timer icon. They're smashed up together right now, so we need to clean that up. You're going to come across this as you're building your add-on. So I wanted to teach you how to clean that up. Rather than making use of an add to menu, what we can do is we already have an add to menu on the View 3D. So we should probably stick with this graph and just clean up what we have here. We've got two labels, some separators. What we can do is we can delete these separators. We can bring our scale back to 1. Combine the text on the label and get rid of the extra label. So we'll drag this as the top. Clean up our rows. And then come back to the Pomodoro, we can get rid of our add to menu and we can make an interface function. So we can still set up all of our UI in this graph. We can call the function in another graph. I love interface functions. So UIFN, and we'll just call this Pomodoro add to menu. Now we can call that interface function. You won't see a ton change, but you will see that we've shifted our icons into an area where they look better. Nice. So I want to do a similar structure where we give ourselves an icon and we give ourselves some numbers. It sure would be nice to see how much time you have left on your Pomodoro timer. And to see the state that your timer is in, whether it's on or off, or whether you're in break or working. So rather than making use of the depress for our icon, we can instead set up a switch icon. So if you drag out from your icon node, you can go to the logic section. And this is probably one of the coolest features of Serpens for the UI, being able to switch icons and switch data. Plug the Pomo toggle into switch. And what this does is based on an input condition. If it's true, then we'll use icon 1. If it's false, then we'll use icon 2. Or you can continue looping down to more switch icons. And we want to check to see whether we're on or off and whether we're in break or work. So we'll duplicate this down and set it up. So we have a break or work. Now you have to think about this. I've noticed that you can't make use of multiple switch icons for icon 1. You need to drag them through icon number 2. So you have to think about how you want your variable to tie everything in. If we're not toggled on, then we're going to use icon 1. If we are toggled on, then we're going to switch down to the next set of switch icons. So we'll throw in an invert boolean here, and that's under converter, invert boolean. You can drag it right in the middle, and it'll tie them together. And if we do have an active break, we can grab our icon, and we can actually grab a few icons now. And we'll shift this up just a little bit. Give ourselves room for our icons. We'll set the dead tomato if we're not running. And if we are running, we have a Pomodoro break. And we have a tomato slice that's fully filled. We'll just set that for the working for now. We do need to set up our scene, so we can come back to our main time recorder graph, copy in the scene context portal, and come back to our Pomodoro. I love bookmarks, it makes it so easy. And we'll zoom out, paste. Okay, there it is. We'll just set this up. Yeah, we'll just leave it up here for now. Actually, we'll bring it down over by our operators. Okay, we need to copy over, and we're going to be using a couple of portals inside this graph. So out scene. Make sure we label them. The color is nice, but if we need to minimize them, we have names too. All right. So whether we're breaking active or whether we're working or toggling, we'll be able to switch our icons, and you should be able to see that updating on the Pomodoro button. Shift R to compile, and we can take off the depress now. Make that false, recompile, there we go. Okay, so when I click this, the icon has changed. And if I don't move my mouse, you may or may not see the next switch icon move because Blender doesn't always redraw. And that can be kind of frustrating if you're wanting the icons to continually change. And you don't want to be always redrawing every scan of Blender's drawing mechanisms because that's a lot of performance cost. But notice how we did have a tomato and now we have a tomato slice. As I'm moving around the scene, you should see some redrawing, but if I don't move my mouse, you're not going to see it update. So we can fix that real quick by coming into our Python code, and I'm going to turn the timer off just for a minute. So notice that when we do interact, we do get the dead tomato, and we are seeing the icons change, so that's a good sign. We can make use under regular circumstances inside of Serpens. There's a special node for this. If you want to update the screen and redraw on the screen, under our program, we have a refresh view. And what this does is allows Blender to go through every single area in our screen and refresh or redraw the area. We can't make use of this because when we're running inside of our Pomo timer, we're calling this script node. And the Serpens nodes don't necessarily have themselves registered when we first call this. So you could copy that code. When you compile your add-on, you could go look in your add-on and pull the redraw code. But it's not going to link itself because it hasn't been built by the add-on yet. But what we can do is we can use the code that redraw node is doing, or the refresh view node is doing. And so I just navigated into the Serpens Visual Scripting add-on and I opened up the refresh view.py. And under the imperative code section, there is the defining function for the SN redraw. And we only need this part. So for some variable A in our screen areas, we'll go through every area that is part of the screen areas and we will tag redraw, which is just a fancy way of saying redraw that area. So we can copy all that, or I'll just type it out actually. And we're going to do it right as we increment each minute. That way we're only calling the redraw method once a minute. So for A in bpy.context .screen.areas, make a colon, a.tag underscore redraw. So we'll save now, recompile, and let's test and see how well our icon is updating. I shouldn't have to move my mouse. You should see that the icons update themselves now. And that's so sweet. Look at that. Okay, let's get rid of this ugly text. We've got our switch icon set up. We're going to do something similar now. So we can see how much time we have left in both our work time and our break time. And I want to get these icons into their own area. So what we can do is we can add ourselves a nice little portal here. So Shift A and under Special, set up another portal. And we'll call this one Icons. Now we can take all this info, can show it nice and cleanly over here for our switch icons. Okay, we're going to set it up for a label now. So rather than having POMO, we're going to call in the work time that's remaining and the break time that's remaining. So we know that we need at least both of those properties. So POMO work time, grab its property, and POMO break time. Put it down a little bit. We also are going to be needing a variable that we're using inside of our timer. And we have the POMO minutes, because that's getting updated every Python call inside of our timer function. And all we have to do is subtract the time set point for work from the minutes to get the remaining minutes. So we'll need to do some math, but let's first make sure we add to our active scene portal. And we can do some math now. So Shift A, and it's going to be under Logic, Math. Take our total work time set point minus the minutes, set this to subtract, and we can duplicate this and set this one to subtract. And just like we have on our switch icons, there is also a really cool node that is called switch data. And it's inside the logic as well. And we have switch data right here. We have some condition we want to use. So obviously we have a break and a work time, so we'll want to check to see if our break is active. Set that up for our condition, and if true, it's actually, since we have this structured, let's use an invert boolean. So Shift A under converter. So if we're not in break, we'll be looking at the work time. If we are in break, we're looking at the break time. And we'll export this out to another portal. We'll just call this time. Now we can take all this, set it nice and cleanly over in the same area where we're doing switching. Minimize both of these. We have a nice clean UI. Let's go ahead and compile and let's see how well this works. Hey, look at that. That's so cool. And it's updating on its own every minute call. Now, obviously, we're running this using a timer frequency of 1 second right now. That looks really cool. Now, I'm going to teach you how to make use of notifications as well, because when we go into break or we need to come back to work, it would be nice to notify the user, hey, your Pomodoro's done. Maybe they're not in the 3D view, maybe they're in another area of Blender. You can notify the user that it's time to take a break. This is to teach you a little bit more about notifications. So when we built our property for the break active, the reason why I chose to use this instead of making it a variable is there's a special section in the properties that's called the update section. And when a property updates its value, you can look at that update code, and we'll set this down here by the operators. We have execute sockets along with the value of the property and the scene that that property was tied to when it updated. This is really cool because now we can make use of logic and it will call it every time that property updates. And we know that the property is going to update when we hit a break or when we get back to work. So I'm going to teach you about another node. This is called the if-else node, and it's under program if-else. So just like we have if statements inside of our Python code, we have if nodes inside of Serpens. And the cool thing is we can plug, since this is a Boolean, we can plug this right into the condition. If the condition is true, it will execute on the execute for the true. If it's false, you'll get an execution on the false. If you want to continue executing more code, after it's completed this section, it will continue on to the next area. What we want to do is we want to notify. We want to notify during a break that is active and when it's time to get back to work. So we can make two operators for that. And this is another reason why we have operators. So Shift A under Program and Operator. And let's just set up two operators back to back. We'll set one that says time for break and one that says back to work. And in order to make these operators notify a user, you can go to the pop-up section. And I'll show you confirm just to show you what it looks like, and I'll show you pop-up. So when it's time for a break, you'll see what confirm looks like, and when it's time to get back to work, you'll see what pop-up looks like. And we're just going to call these operators. So drag out, and under Program, we have a run operator. Duplicate down. Get back to work. So let's compile and start up our timer, and we'll see first the confirm for a time for a break. And you should see the back to work. So you move your mouse on the confirm and you lose it. If you move your mouse on the pop-up, you don't. But when you click, you'll lose it. So that's the difference between those two. We're going to stick with the pop-ups because if you're moving around, you won't lose it. And we'll stop that now. So change our operator from confirm to pop-up. And let's recompile. I can move my mouse over here and it would get another pop-up. You continue getting pop-ups if you don't click on them or click away from them. So what might be nice is maybe you don't want to continue timing when you have the notification. Maybe you want to stop the Pomodoro timer until you click OK. You want something to finish. You don't want to continue timing, or maybe you need to walk away for just a minute, so you don't want to click on anything. You can interrupt these timers when you have the notification, and there's the invoke section on your operator, and then there's the operator execute section. Invoke will happen right before the pop-up arrives, and it will wait for you to interact with the pop-up. And if you don't click OK, then it's not going to call the operator section, but if you do click OK, then it will call the operator. So what we can do is we can stop our timer, just like we've been calling down below. So Pomo start and Pomo stop. We could call these operators during the invoke section. And so we can invoke during a time for a break. We can do a run operator. We can set up for a stop Pomodoro. And if you interact with it, we can start back up the Pomodoro. We can set this for both of these, the back to work and time for a break. So duplicate those. Let's compile again. So now as you're working, you're going to get that pop-up notification, and the Pomodoro timer is going to stop. It's not going to continue running until you click the OK button. Man, that's so cool. Look at that. Now, if we want to adjust the size of this pop-up window, we can do that as well. And that's under the width section here. So we can set this to something like, I don't know, like 110 and 110. Make sure we stop our timer, recompile, and start up our timer. Now we have a lot smaller pop-up. It's a little more form-fitting for our message. Yeah, looks like it'll work. So now all we have to do, if we want to adjust the amount of time that we need to use for our timer frequency, we can call that by changing the default value here. So let's say we wanted to go to 2 seconds. We'd have to recompile in order to do that. Well, it'd be nice to add a debug menu on top of our already existing debug menu. So we can do that. We'll just make another interface function. So under functions, interface function, Shift A. And under interface, let's add ourselves a label. And we'll just say Pomodoro debugging. We can add ourselves in a box as well. Boxes are kind of nice to make things a little more structured and organized. And let's add in our debug timer frequency interface. Remember, we need to attach our scene. Steal one of these. And now we need to call that on the main time recorder graph. Our debug section down below. Do a run interface function. Actually, let's give ourselves just a little bit of room with the separator. Just a factor of 1. Now I have the Pomodoro debug. So now when we compile, come and take a look at this, and we have a nice little box section for our Pomodoro. And we can change our timer frequency without having to recompile. So set this back to a default value. We can actually set the default, since we are going to build this add-on, we'll set it to 60. And we can adjust that time value here. So I can adjust it to 0.5 and run my timer. And I can adjust this up to 20. And it instantly affects the timer after it completes the current time that it's working on. So if you went from 60 seconds down to 1 second, you would have to wait for the current timing function to complete its cycle. And then on the next cycle, it would update the time. So if I change this back down to 1, I have to wait 20 seconds for this icon to update. There it goes. Now it's updating much quicker. Now if I click away, notice how the timer has stopped working. Well, that's because we never interacted with it, and we didn't click the OK button, so only invoke got called. The operator is not running back up. Maybe that's something you want for your users. You could always set up some user interface in your panel to let the user decide whether they want to pause it during notifications. And you would just add in some if statements and maybe a variable or a property to set that up. But there we go. That's not too much for our graph. Actually bring this down. Make the visibility a little bit better. Yeah, that looks really good. Look what we've accomplished with only 15 lines of code on our main timer and one graph, really. And that's the Pomodoro. So now's the time for your homework. Inside of the Gumroad package that I put on Gumroad, we've got all these icons, and you've got a big break as well. What I'd like you to do is figure out how to continue making your switch icons come down the list and comparing against the time that you have and dividing it into fifths. And we don't have something that's greater than a fifth, it's going to be this for the working. And as you get higher and higher, you can make use of each of the divisions of a tomato slice. And you can also count, because we're keeping track of how many Pomodoros we've completed. After so many Pomodoros, you can make yourself another property for a set point and define how many you need for a big break. Now, typically with the rule of Pomodoros, after 3 Pomodoro completions, you should get a break, a big break, and it's usually twice the amount of the break time defined. So another part of your homework would be to allow your users to have an end panel right alongside the time recorder and allow them to define their big break time, allow them to define how many Pomodoros need to complete before that big break gets activated, allow them to define their regular break time, and I can show you what that looks like as an example. Let's go ahead and save this. Okay, so on this main Pomodoro graph that I've got built, when I compile this, you should see that I have my own panel with a start and stop for the Pomodoro. And we've got a nice helpful interaction area. Tells you when the Pomodoro is timing. It'll switch data based upon the status. Tell you how much time has elapsed, and I also added in the number of seconds for mine. You can do that if you want. So I've got minutes and seconds in my timer. The number of Pomodoros that have been completed. And then we have some interaction for properties. So we can set the Pomodoro for a certain amount of work time. We can set how long the break is. We can set how many Pomodoros we want to complete for a long break and how long that break is. In my own debugging section, I have seconds in a minute and deciding whether I want to pause or not for notification. And you can take your switch icons farther and farther down. And all you need is just the know-how. And you already have that. You can do the same thing with your switch data. You should know how to do all this now on your own. So I challenge you to stretch yourself. I know this add-on is mainly for teaching purposes to teach you how to use Serpens, but exercises are always helpful to make you go out and do things on your own. And with that, we'll go ahead and finish up this video. I hope you've enjoyed the Pomodoro series. In our next video, what I'd really like to cover is a really cool feature that they just added to Serpens not too long ago, and it's called the snippets feature. And it is really cool. You basically can build up your own functions or interface functions and save them as a snippet. We'll also teach you how to set up an add-on preferences and give your users the opportunity to set up certain parameters. A lot of these things could be set up in the add-on preferences and allowing them to save with the preferences as well, so that every time they install or when they're using your add-on on a new session of Blender, they have things set up for themselves to get working. And on that, we'll see you in the next video.